Hi, this is John with Electric Bike Report, and today we're here talking about the Velotric Nomad 1. This is a Class 2 fat tire e-bike that's suitable for just about any environment. A few things that really jumped out to me right away. First of all, the visual design. This bike looks great and it comes in a nice variety of colors. Second thing is the range on the bike. Velotric claims a range of up to 55 miles, and our testing supported that. Third thing is just value. There's a lot of bikes in the $1,500 to $2,000 price range, and this bike performs on the high end of that range while being priced towards the low end. So with those things in mind, let's dive right into more detail. First thing about the Nomad is really just its visual style. It looks great, it's got a nice angular design, and it's available in a refreshing 6 color options split between the high step and the step-through versions of the bike. A lot of times we kind of just get blacks, whites, and grays, but it's really good to see some splashes of color that are available here, and the signature mango yellow is also available in the step-through version. Second thing about the Nomad is that as a fat tire bike, it's sort of an all-purpose bike. It can handle roads just as easily as dirt paths and some gravel. Part of that is due to the 750 watt motor that we'll talk about a little bit more, but then also the big knobby tires, the front suspension fork, and the 692 watt hour battery. So coming back to that motor, this is a proprietary design by Velotric. It's manufactured by a separate company with ties to Segway and Lime. It provides really reliable uphill power as well as really impressive range when combined with that battery. So overall, the Nomad is just a really solid value for your money. It performs like a more expensive bike, and we're really pleased by it. So now that we've covered all the basics, let's take a more deep dive into those specs. All right, so we've already covered a little bit about the motor and the battery. We'll dive into those again a little bit later on in their test sections, but I wanted to cover some of the other features on the bike. First thing to note is the 8-speed drivetrain with the Shimano Altis derailleur. Gotta say that I really appreciated that 8th gear when I'm traveling at higher speeds. Next thing to note is the 180 millimeter hydraulic disc brakes. Those perform pretty well in the downhill as well as on flat ground as well. Next thing is the full coverage fenders on both the front and back, which did a good job of keeping me dry when riding through some puddles. Next thing to note is the integrated front LED headlight. That did a great job of illuminating the path ahead of me when I was traveling at dusk there. Next is the hydraulic front suspension fork with 80 millimeters of travel. It's worth noting that that came fairly stiff out of the box, but with a little bit of tuning up, it got a lot more comfortable. So we'll look at the cockpit right now as I turn on the LCD screen here. First thing to note is the ergonomic rubber grips on the handlebars here. Those did very well over time. Despite being on the bike for quite a few hours. We have the throttle lever here and the control panel that adjusts your pedal assist level. On the right side here, we have the rapid fire trigger shifter that manages the drivetrain. That also performed great. And then in the central display here, we have a black and white, fairly basic readout, but it's very visible, easy to read. It displays your speed, your pedal assist level, the battery level, as well as your trip. I did want to take a second to talk about the battery display here. We generally prefer to see percentage-based displays instead of the bar readouts like this one, but it does the job and it is what it is for this. So all right, let's go ahead and dive into those test results and see how the Nomad did. So we've already covered a little bit about the Nomad 1's 180 millimeter hydraulic disc brakes, but how did those actually perform in the real world? So in order to gauge that, we perform a standardized brake test where we bring the bike up to 20 miles per hour. We stop while maintaining control of the bike, and then we measure the distance it takes for the bike to come to a complete stop. We repeat that process multiple times and get an average so that we have a better understanding of how the bike performs overall. So with the Nomad 1, the average stopping distance was 22 feet 5 inches, which is right in the expected range. We were very happy with that, but it is worth noting that the Nomad 1 has unbranded brakes. So without knowing who manufactures them, that brings up a little bit of a question of longevity that we cannot speak to, but again, they performed well, and they do use mineral oil, so any standard bleed kit will work just fine for maintaining them. With that in mind, let's jump into the next test. So for our circuit test, we take each bike through a 1-mile loop that's made up of 4 right turns, and it also has a small 30-foot climb. We do this repeatedly, first with no motor assistance, but then again at each pedal assist setting to gain kind of a more complete understanding of how the bike performs at those different levels, and also what speeds are capable with pedal assist levels 1 through 5. So the Nomad at PAS 1 and 2, you don't get a lot of input from the motor. It does help you a little bit on the uphill sections, but overall you're still doing 90% of the work. At PAS 3 though, you're able to feel that input on both flat ground and on the hill, which is really nice. At PAS 4, which I personally feel is sort of the sweet spot for the bike, you get constant input from the motor, but you're still able to get a little bit of a workout if you want. At PAS 5, you really don't have to do much work at all. The motor's pushing you. All you really have to do is engage those cadence sensors on the bike, which means that you just have to keep the pedals moving, and then the motor's doing 98% of the work there. So the kind of a nice thing about the Nomad is that on those low PAS settings, you get sort of more measured, controlled increases as you go up from PAS 1 to 3. And then once you hit 4 and 5, there's more aggressive jumps that really get you going. It is also worth noting that the throttle, if you're relying only on the throttle for movement, that is also governed through the PAS system. At PAS 1, the throttle gets you going at about 10 miles per hour with 2 to 3 miles per hour jumps from there all the way up to the max speed of 20 miles per hour at PAS 5. So let's move on to the next test. So for our range tests, what we do is actually take the bike out twice. First, using the maximum assistance level, in this case that's PAS 5, and then another time at the lowest noticeable assistance level, in this case PAS 2. So with the Nomad here, we have a combination of the 750 watt rear hub motor and the 692 watt hour battery. And as we mentioned before, the motor is proprietary, but they've also worked a little bit on sort of the marriage between the two. And they've tuned that, at least according to their claim, to be more efficient, and our testing kind of showed that. When we are looking at a combination of a motor and battery, we generally like to see a 1-to-1 ratio between those numbers, the wattages on the motor and the watt hours on the battery. With this bike being a little bit low on the battery side, our expectations were a little less than actually what we measured, which was great. So the Nomad's results at the maximum PAS setting, we had a range of 36 miles, and at the minimum PAS setting, we had a range of 64 miles. And that actually lines up very well with Velotric's own testing. They perform a real-world test similar to ours. Their numbers were 61 at minimum assistance and 40 at maximum assistance. So while we perform this range test, this gives us a little bit of extra time on the bike to see how its comfort level goes. In this case, we'll talk a little bit about the handlebar grips, the handlebars themselves, and the saddle. The saddle first, I think. It is nice and wide, it's nice and padded, but I did find that it got a little bit hard over time, especially after a couple of hours. Fortunately, that's something that can be easily swapped out, and it's important to find a saddle that works for you. I've already talked a little bit about the ergonomic grips. Those did maintain a level of comfort over extended periods of time, but the handlebars are really something to discuss. The high step and the step-through versions have a little bit of a different handlebar design. The step-through version has sort of a swept back cruiser style design, while the high step version has more of a flat bar design. I personally enjoyed that version better. This grew a little bit uncomfortable over time, but it was definitely more fun and lent itself to, I think, the color exaggerated style of the bike. So with that in mind, let's continue to our last test. So for our hill tests, we take the bike up a hill affectionately called Hell Hole. It is a third of a mile long with an average grade of 12%, which means it's pretty steep. We chose this hill specifically to push the bike's motor to the limit, and we consider it a success if a bike makes it to the top. Not all of the bikes that we test actually do. In the Nomad's case, it handled the hill like a champ. When taken up the hill on throttle-only power, it made it in 1 minute and 15 seconds with an average speed of 14.5 miles per hour. And at max PAS, that's pedal assist setting 5, it made it in 1 minute and 3 seconds with an average speed of 17.2 miles per hour. Overall, this performed very well. It was a lot of fun to take up a hill. The motor really does all the work, even at a lower PAS setting. And with that rear hub motor, you get that sort of pushed from behind sensation that I personally really enjoyed and found a lot of fun. So with that said, let's move on to our summary of the Nomad. So with a newer company like Velotric, I really feel like they have to go the extra mile to show that they can deliver on a new product like the Nomad, and I believe that Velotric absolutely succeeded with that. It has good specs for its intended purpose. It performed really well in our range and hill tests, and it does all of that while offering a brilliant design, beautiful color selection, and overall providing a really good value. There are a couple things that I'd like to see done a little bit differently on the next iteration of the bike. First is the battery readout on the display. If they transition that to a more percentage-based readout, that would be a little bit more reliable than the bar-based display that it currently has. We feel that it'd be a little bit more trustworthy, and although it performs well regardless. It would also be great to see name-branded components, although that may increase the cost of the bike, and as is, it still performed very well. So I have to say that I really enjoyed testing the bike. I had a lot of fun on it. I think that motor really delivers, especially on the uphill. It's fast, it's fun, and if you're thinking about buying it, I absolutely recommend it. Thanks for watching our review of the Velotric Nomad 1. I hope you really enjoyed it. If you did, please like the video, please subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions, please leave a comment below. We will leave a couple of links in the video description. First, where you can check the current pricing on the Nomad 1, and second, where you can read my detailed review. Again, I'm John with Electric Bike Report, and this is the Velotric Nomad 1.